The signal was weak, almost fading into the endless static of space. It drifted across star systems, passing through abandoned relays and forgotten satellites, until it reached the Galactic communication network. At first, it seemed like nothing. More than background noise, just another lost message from some faraway world. But then the computers caught a pattern. A repeating sequence of coded distress. Someone was calling for help. The message came from the Xyler Collective, a proud alien civilization known for their shining cities and powerful fleets. But the words in the transmission were full of fear. Their voices trembling. Their border colonies were under attack by the Draxan swarm, a name whispered across the galaxy with dread. The Draxan were not like normal enemies. They did not negotiate. They did not take prisoners. They consumed. For weeks, the Xyler had fought them, but their ships were falling one by one. No neighboring power had stepped in to help. Some said it was because the swarm was too dangerous. Others whispered that the Xyler had too many enemies of their own. Either way, their calls went unanswered, until now. In a quiet Terran Confederation listening post far from the front lines, Communications Officer Ethan Cole sat watching the data screens. It was the middle of a slow shift, the kind where time seemed to stop. He was half reading a maintenance report when an alert flashed across his console. He leaned forward, frowning. The message was old, but still repeating. Its signal stretched thin from the long journey. Ethan adjusted the filters, removing the static. The voice of the Xyler commander broke through, pleading for anyone at all, to come to their aid. Ethan stared at the screen for a long moment. Most distress calls were routed to the Central Fleet Office for review, where they often sat for days before anyone decided if it was worth answering. But this one, something about it felt different, urgent. Maybe it was the raw desperation in the alien's tone. Maybe it was the mention of the Draxan swarm. Ethan didn't waste time. He patched the signal through to Admiral Lavra Whitmore, commander of the Terran's 7th Expeditionary Fleet. She was in the middle of a strategy meeting when the call came in. Ethan's voice was steady but quick as he explained. Whitmore's sharp eyes narrowed as the transmission played in the background. When the message ended, she didn't need more convincing. Humans had a reputation in the galaxy. They were Deathworlders, born on a planet filled with storms, predators, diseases, and endless dangers. Their history was full of wars, disasters, and struggles for survival. Where other species evolved in safety, humans had evolved in chaos, and because of that, when humans decided to fight, they fought with a kind of stubbornness and fire that terrified their enemies. They did not show up for politics. They did not show up for small favors. When humans answered a call, they brought war within hours. Admiral Whitmore issued the command. Every available warship in the 7th Expeditionary Fleet was to prepare for departure. The orders spread through the fleet like electricity. In the great shipyards of Vega Prime, engineers dropped their current projects and turned their focus to readying the warships. Drones ferried ammunition to the weapon bays, loaders filled the missile racks, and crews double-checked the shield emitters. The air was thick with the smell of oil, metal, and ionized coolant. Veteran soldiers moved through the corridors with grim faces. They all knew what it meant to go up against the Draxan swarm. It wasn't going to be a rescue mission. It was going to be a full-scale war. Back in the listening post, Ethan watched the fleet status reports updating in real time. The names of the great Terran warships filled the display. TCS Iron Resolve, TCS Vanguard, TCS Dominion, and others. He felt a knot in his stomach, part fear, part excitement. He had been in the Confederation Navy for years, but he had never seen the full force of a Deathworlder fleet deployed at once. Outside, the cold stars shone against the black void. Somewhere out there, the Xyler were still holding on, hoping that someone would answer. They had no idea that the humans had heard them. They had no idea that the Deathworlders were coming. In the galaxy's quiet corners, news of the mobilization began to spread. Alien traders whispered in shadowy cantinas about the Terran fleet moving out. Some thought it was foolish. Nobody survived fighting the Draxan head-on. Others remembered the few times humans had gone to war and how the outcomes had rewritten entire star maps. For those who feared the swarm, hope flickered for the first time in years. For those who feared humanity, dread returned in the war rooms. Of the Draxan swarm, commanders scanned their sensors. New contacts appeared on the edges of their claimed space. They didn't recognize the signatures. They didn't yet understand what was coming for them. By the time they did, it would be too late. And so, the signal that had drifted through space for weeks had finally found its answer. The Deathworlders were on the move, and when the Deathworlders moved, the galaxy changed. The order had been given. And the entire Terran 7th Expeditionary Fleet came alive like a great machine shaking off its slumber. There was no hesitation, no slow build-up when Admiral Larvro Whitmore commanded a mobilization. The galaxy knew it meant action. Across the sprawling shipyards of Vega Prime, massive gates opened, revealing the dark hulks of warships sleeping. In their dry docks, engineers and mechanics swarmed over them, their uniforms streaked with grease. Their hands working with practiced speed. Every tool sparked, every loading arm hummed. The air filled with the metallic scent of fresh forged armor, and the faint ozone crackle from power cores awakening after months in standby. The Terran fleet was not small, and it was not subtle. 4 enormous dreadnought-class warships formed its backbone, each one a moving fortress bristling with weaponry. They were the Iron Resolve, the Vanguard, the Dominion, and the Starbreaker, names that carried weight and history across human space. 6 heavy cruisers, faster and more agile, would serve as their shield and spear, their hulls lined with missile silos, railgun turrets, and plasma batteries. Behind them came the support craft, repair ships, medical frigates, fuel carriers, and resupply tenders, all essential to keep the fleet alive deep in enemy space. At the heart of it all was the Iron Resolve, Admiral Whitmore's flagship. Her steel-gray hull bore battle scars that no one had bothered to polish away, each one a reminder of a fight survived. From its bridge, she could direct the entire fleet's movements with precision, turning dozens of ships into one single, unstoppable blade. In the lower decks, Communications Officer Ethan Cole worked his station. His mind split between running diagnostics and absorbing the reality of what was about to happen. He had relayed the distress call only hours before, and now he was part of the response. He could feel the tension in the air. It wasn't fear exactly, but a heavy awareness that this mission would not be easy. Orders echoed across every deck of every ship in the Iron Resolve's hangars. Fighter squadrons ran last-minute checks on their craft. Pilots in black flight suits moved between rows of sleek interceptors, running hands along the hulls like soldiers patting the shoulders of comrades before a battle. Ordnance crews loaded missiles with glowing guidance nodes, each one carefully locked into place. On the cruisers, crews hauled massive railgun rounds into storage, the shells taller than a man and weighing more than a small vehicle. In the engine rooms, technicians monitored the reactors as their hum grew into a roar. Every gauge climbed, every system lit up green from orbit. The shipyards themselves looked like stars coming alive. Vast docking platforms glowed with activity, and the warships slowly began to detach from their moorings. One by one, they drifted into formation, their massive silhouettes blotting out the starlight. They didn't need to cloak or hide. Deathworlders never crept toward a fight. They marched. The alien observers watching from nearby systems sent hurried transmissions back to their homeworlds. In the spaceports of the Ilvari Republic, traders muttered over drinks about the Terran fleet moving out. In the conference halls of the Vactor Union, nervous diplomats whispered that the humans must be mad to challenge the Draxan swarm directly. Some laughed at the foolishness, others, those who remembered the few rare times humans had gone to war, went silent because they knew what was coming. On the Iron Resolve's bridge, Admiral Whitmore stood with her hands clasped behind her back. The main display showed the fleet's formation tightening. each ship slotting into its place like the teeth of a gear. Her voice was calm but carried the weight of command as she addressed her captains over the secure channel. She spoke of the mission, the dangers, and the fact that they were not going to assist the Xyler. They were going to end the threat. Her words were simple, but in them was the unshakable promise that if the Draxan swarm had dared to strike, they would regret it. Ethan Cole sat at his station, his eyes moving over data streams. He watched as encrypted orders moved between ships, carrying targeting protocols, fuel requirements, and emergency fallback points, even in this organized chaos. He noticed the small things: crew members checking their weapons twice, engineers patting the bulkheads of their ships like good luck rituals. Every person had their own way of preparing for war. In the hangars of the Starbreaker, a young pilot named Alyssa Kane stood by her fighter. She had flown in skirmishes before, but never in a campaign of this scale. When asked if she was nervous, she simply smiled and said, "We're Terrans. We don't go halfway." Her words spread through the squadron like fire. It was that same Terran attitude, equal parts confidence and defiance, that made them so dangerous. By the time the fleet was fully mobilized, the space above Vega Prime was filled with the dark shapes of warships in perfect formation. Each one carried enough firepower to level a continent, and together they were a force no sane enemy would ever want to face. In the galaxy, wars were often fought with limited strikes, small fleets, and political maneuvering. The Deathworlders did not play that game. When they went to war, they brought everything. Admiral Whitmore gave the final order. Massive ion drives flared to life, and the fleet began to move. Space around them shimmered as jump drives engaged, pulling the warships toward the coordinates of the Xyler distress signal. To the people of Vega Prime watching from the surface, it looked like a wall of steel vanishing into the stars. To those who knew the Draxan swarm, it looked like death. On the horizon, and somewhere far away, on a burning world still under siege, the Xyler had no idea what was coming for them. But soon, they would. The Deathworlders were on their way, and they were bringing the kind of war the galaxy rarely survived. The Deathworlder fleet arrived in Xyler space, like a shadow sweeping over the stars. Their arrival was not quiet, their ships cutting through the void in tight formation, their hulls reflecting the cold light of distant suns. The Xyler, who had been bracing for the next wave of Draxan attacks, suddenly found themselves staring at the largest Terran warfleet they had ever seen. For a moment, they did not know whether to feel relief or fear. The distress call had been sent in desperation, but the Xyler High Chancellor Varys had not truly believed anyone would answer. For weeks, their communications had been ignored, their pleas dismissed by the neighboring empires. And now here they were, humans, the so-called Deathworlders, their reputation echoing across the galaxy. Varys had heard the stories of battles where the humans fought like storms, refusing to yield until their enemies were broken. And seeing their warships up close, she realized those stories had not been exaggerated. The fleet slowed as it entered orbit around the battered colony of Relkar. From above, the devastation was plain to see. Once bright cities lay in ruins, their towers reduced to skeletal remains. Smoke rose from craters that had once been markets and gardens. Orbital defense platforms floated as wreckage, torn apart by the Draxans' living weapons. And just beyond the system's edge, enemy patrols still lurked, watching the newcomers with predatory interest. A transmission request came from the surface, and within minutes, Admiral Larva Whitmore appeared on the holodisplay in the Xyler High Council chamber. Her image was crisp, her posture straight, her eyes cold and focused. Varys stepped forward, trying to mask the weight of exhaustion in Kosov Azin. Her voice as she welcomed the humans. Admiral Whitmore didn't waste time on elaborate greetings. She listened carefully as Varys explained the situation. The swarm had destroyed 3 colonies in as many weeks, and Relkar would have fallen within days. The Xyler had been fighting back, but their fleets were now reduced to a fraction of their strength. When Varys finished, Whitmore's voice was firm. "We're not here to hold the line," she said. "We're here to break them." The council chamber fell silent. The translator AI repeated the words for those who didn't understand Terran Standard. But the tone was universal. The Xyler delegation exchanged uncertain glances. No other power had ever spoken with such certainty about facing the Draxan. Most fought to survive, not to win. Down on Relkar, citizens looked up at the sky, spotting the dark shapes of Terran ships cutting across the horizon. Some whispered in awe, others with fear. For generations, the Xyler had seen humans as unpredictable, dangerous. They were allies in name, but the galaxy's gossip painted them as too aggressive, too willing to throw themselves into fights that others avoided. Now those same traits felt like the only hope left. A landing craft descended from the Iron Resolve, carrying Admiral Whitmore and a small escort. The ship's ramp touched down on the steps of the Xyler High Command bunker, where the Chancellor and her guards waited. The air was thick with tension as the two leaders faced each other in person for the first time. Whitmore's uniform was plain but immaculate, her boots heavy against the stone floor. Her eyes scanned everything, the guards, the weapons, the exits before she extended a hand in greeting. It was a human gesture, one that Varys hesitated over before copying. The Admiral's grip was strong and brief. They moved inside, away from the gaze of the public. Maps and holograms lit the war room, showing enemy troop movements and known hive ship locations. Whitmore studied the patterns with the calm patience of someone who had fought against overwhelming odds before. She asked direct questions. How many ships were left where the Draxan were gathering? What supply lines still existed? Her officers took notes, marking possible strike points and fallback positions. The Xyler military advisors, still cautious, suggested that the humans focus on defending Relkar until reinforcements arrived. But Whitmore shook her head. "If we sit here and wait, they'll keep coming," she said. "We hit them first, and we hit them so hard they can't get back up." Her words carried the weight of a strategy the Xyler had never dared attempt. For them, survival meant retreating when necessary, preserving lives even if territory was lost. For the humans, survival meant making the enemy too broken to continue. Outside, Xyler soldiers gathered near the landing zone, staring at the Terran Marines guarding the Admiral's shuttle. The Marines' armor was thick, their weapons compact but deadly. Every movement was disciplined, precise, as if they expected an attack at any moment. Rumors spread quickly among the troops. These were warriors from a death world, a place where danger was a part of daily life. If they could live there, perhaps they could stand against the swarm. From the moment the meeting ended, preparations began. Human and Xyler officers worked side by side, integrating their communication systems and coordinating their fleets. The Xyler pilots were amazed at how quickly the humans adapted to new tactical data. They did not hesitate, did not waste time on long debates. They acted. And somewhere beyond the system's edge, the Draxan swarm began to notice the change. Their scouts reported new warships in orbit around Relkar, ships with weapons they did not recognize. They had faced many enemies before, but these newcomers did not behave like the others. They didn't stay behind defenses. They were moving outward, toward the swarm. On the bridge of the Iron Resolve, Admiral Whitmore stood watching the stars. Her mind was already on the next step, the first strike. She knew the swarm would come in force once they realized humans were here. And when that happened, the real battle would begin. The first enemy contact came sooner than anyone expected. Human long-range sensors picked up movement on the far edge of Relkar's orbit. Several Draxan patrol ships, their living hulls twisting like dark shadows against the stars. They had not come in force, not yet. But they were close enough to scout the human fleet and test its defenses. On the bridge of the Iron Resolve, Admiral Lavra Whitmore stood still, her eyes fixed on the tactical display. "They'll want to see what we're made of," she said. Quietly, "Let's show them." The order went out, and the fleet shifted. Cruisers moved forward in a protective arc, while the dreadnoughts stayed center, their heavy guns tracking the incoming patrol. Fighter squadrons powered up in the hangars, the deep hum of their engines filling the air as pilots strapped in. Lieutenant Jason Ward, leader of the Black Talon Squadron, ran a final check on his systems. His voice was calm over the comms, but the younger pilots could hear the excitement in it. They had trained for this moment. This wasn't just defense. This was the first punch. The Draxon ships came closer, their movements strange and fluid, as if they were swimming through space rather than flying. Their hulls glistened with a thin, wet sheen that shimmered under the system's sunlight. Some of the smaller ones seemed almost alive, their armor plates pulsing as they adjusted formation. The larger ones carried spines that glowed faintly, energy building for their first volley. Without waiting for them to fire, Whitmore gave the signal. The Iron Resolve's spinal railgun fired first, the shot ripping through space like a spear of light. It slammed into the lead Draxon cruiser, tearing it clean in half, the explosion sending fragments spinning into the void. The cruisers followed up with coordinated missile strikes, each one finding its mark with brutal precision. Within seconds, the first wave of enemy ships was already burning, but the Draxon did not retreat. They surged forward, their strange, organic weapons spitting arcs of green plasma. One bolt struck the Terran cruiser TCS Harbinger, rocking it hard enough to throw crew to the deck. Damage control crews moved instantly, sealing hull breaches and rerouting power. The humans had learned long ago never to let damage slow them down in battle. Black Talons, break and hit their flanks, Ward ordered. His squadron peeled off, engines flaring bright as they weaved between the enemy ships. The Draxon fighters were fast but lacked precision, relying on sheer numbers and chaos to overwhelm their opponents. The human pilots used discipline and training to turn that chaos against them. Picking off targets one by one, Ward's fighter slid under the belly of a Draxon interceptor, his cannons shredding its wing before he looped around and blasted its cockpit apart. Down on Relkar's surface, Xylar soldiers stood outside their bunkers, looking up at the sky. Bright flashes marked the battle above, silent from the ground, but terrifying in their beauty. For months, they had watched their own fleets fight and die against the swarm. Now, for the first time, they were watching the enemy fall. The Xylar fleet, battered but still capable, moved in from the far side of the planet. Their ships were smaller and less heavily armed than the Terran warships, but they joined the fight with renewed energy. It was not just their world they were fighting for now, it was the chance to strike back. Terran and Xylar ships formed a joint firing line, their combined weapons tearing holes in the Draxon formation. Minutes turned into hours, the battle shifting across Relkar's orbit like a deadly dance. One by one, the enemy ships began to fall back. The humans didn't let them escape without a price. Whitmore ordered the cruisers forward, railguns and plasma cannons hammering the retreating Draxon until the last of them vanished into the darkness beyond the system. When the final shot was fired, the silence in the void felt heavy on the Iron Resolve's bridge. Ethan Cole let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The casualty reports came in: some damage, some injuries, but no losses. For the humans, it was a clean victory. For the Xylar, it was something more. They had seen the Deathworlders fight, and they had seen the swarm break on the surface. Chancellor Varys stood on a balcony outside the High Command bunker. She watched the Terran fleet in orbit, the lines of their ships sharp and unshaken. She realized then that this battle had changed everything. Her people were no longer alone. The humans had come, and they had brought with them the kind of war that might actually turn the tide. But Admiral Whitmore knew this was only the beginning. The patrol had been small, just a scout force. The main Draxon fleet would hear about this, and they would come in numbers. The next fight would not be easy. But she also knew one thing: the Deathworlders had drawn first blood, and they would not stop until the swarm was broken. Word of the victory at Relkar traveled faster than light, carried across the galaxy on encrypted channels, merchant gossip, and intercepted military reports. For some, It was only a line in a fleet status update: enemy patrol destroyed, friendly forces unharmed. But for others, it was a shockwave. The Draxan swarm had been beaten in open combat. And not just beaten. They had been driven back in the high towers of distant worlds. Leaders who had ignored the Xylers' pleas now called emergency meetings. They tried to mask their fear with diplomatic words, but everyone knew what it meant. If the Deathworlders had entered the war, everything would change. Some worried that human involvement would escalate the conflict. Others saw opportunity, wondering if perhaps humanity's ferocity could be aimed at their own rivals someday. In the dusty markets of border stations, traders swapped rumors over cups of strong drink. They spoke of human warships that moved like predators, of raildens that could split a cruiser in half with one shot. Stories grew with each telling. Some claimed the humans had destroyed the Draxan ships in minutes. Others said the humans were building a fleet so large it could blot out a star. The truth was less exaggerated. But the impact was the same. Fear was spreading among the swarm's allies, and hope was rising among their enemies. On the Iron Resolve, Admiral Lavra Whitmore stood on the bridge, listening as Ethan Cole relayed intercepted communications. One of them made her pause. It was a Draxan signal, short and clipped. They were calling for reinforcements. They knew the humans were here now, and they were taking the threat seriously. Whitmore didn't see this as a reason to slow down. She saw it as proof that they had struck a nerve. She gathered her senior officers in the strategy room. The holographic display showing the map of the sector, lines traced known Draxan positions, supply points, and the routes they used to move. Between systems, Ethan zoomed in on one cluster of enemy ships near the outer edge of Xyler territory. "This is their staging ground," he said. "If we hit it, they'll lose the ability to strike at multiple colonies at once." The plan formed quickly. Rather than wait for the swarm to gather its full strength, they would take the fight to them. The TCS Iron Resolve and her sister Dreadnought. The TCS Vanguard would lead the assault. Cruisers would flank, cutting off escape routes, while fighter squadrons hunted down smaller craft. The goal wasn't just to win another battle, it was to cripple the swarm so badly that it would take months for them to recover, while the humans prepared. The Xyler watched in a mix of awe and disbelief. Their own fleets had been reduced to hit-and-run tactics, conserving strength wherever possible. But the humans didn't think that way. For them, holding back was just giving the enemy more time to prepare. It was a dangerous philosophy, but one that seemed to work for them. News of the coming strike spread quietly through the fleet. In the mess halls, pilots and gunners spoke in low voices about what might be waiting for them. Some were veterans, carrying memories of other battles against other enemies. Others were young, stepping into their first major campaign with the kind of reckless confidence only humans seemed to have. In the fighter bays, Lieutenant Jason Ward inspected his craft. He had fought the swarm once already, but this time would be different. This time, they were going straight into enemy territory. He told his squadron, "Don't think about getting out alive. Think about finishing the job. If we do that, we'll all make it back." On Relkar's surface, Chancellor Varys addressed her people. She spoke of the alliance with the humans, calling it a new dawn for their world. Her words were careful, but her tone carried hope. For months, her broadcasts had been warnings, updates on losses, and instructions for evacuations. Now, for the first time, she could tell her people that the tide was turning. In orbit, the fleet's final preparations were underway. Fuel lines disconnected, weapon systems fully loaded, shields calibrated for maximum endurance. On the Iron Resolve, Ethan monitored COMMS traffic, filtering out background chatter to focus on enemy signals. He caught a fragment of a Draxan transmission, something about a hive ship moving toward Xyler Prime. He reported it immediately to Whitmore. If the hive ship reached the Xyler homeworld, it could devastate the entire planet in hours. Whitmore didn't hesitate. The mission shifted. Now it wasn't just about crippling the staging ground. It was about intercepting the hive ship before it could get anywhere near Xyler Prime. She sent the new orders to the fleet. All ships would converge on the predicted path of the hive ship. No delays, no diversions. They would hit it before it could strike. As the fleet moved into position, the atmosphere on the bridge tightened. Crew members spoke in short, clipped sentences. Pilots sat in their cockpits, helmets on, waiting for the launch signal. In the hangar, mechanics gave final checks to fighters, patting the metal like a lucky charm before stepping back. The hum of the engines grew louder, the vibrations running through the decks like a heartbeat. Ethan looked out through the observation window at the endless black ahead of them. Somewhere out there, the hive ship was coming, bigger than anything they had faced so far, deadlier than anything the Xyler had survived before. But the humans weren't turning away. They were racing toward it. The hive ship appeared on long-range scanners as a faint shifting shadow against the darkness of space. At first, it was hard to tell its shape. Its surface seemed to writhe, as if it were alive. But as the Terran fleet closed in, the details became clearer. It was massive, far larger than any Draxan vessel the humans had faced before, stretching for kilometers. Its hull was a patchwork of dark plates and pulsing organic tissue, each section crawling with smaller living drones. It was like staring at a floating fortress made of both metal and flesh. On the bridge of the Iron Resolve, Admiral Larva Whitmore studied the tactical display. "It's not just a warship," Ethan Cole said quietly from the CUM station. "It's a carrier, a factory, and a city all in one. They could breed an army inside that thing." Whitmore's expression stayed cold. "Then we make sure it doesn't get the chance," she replied. The fleet spread into attack formation. The dreadnoughts moved to the front, the cruisers fanning out on the flanks, and fighter squadrons took position behind, ready to strike when the shields dropped. The Draxan hive ship didn't flee it turned toward the humans. Glowing spines along its hull, charging with energy. It was coming straight for them. That meant it wasn't just trying to pass through Xyler space. It was on a direct course to Xyler Prime. The first exchange came without warning. A blast of green plasma erupted from the hive ship, slamming into the TCS Vanguard, the dreadnoughts. Shields flared, holding for now, but the sheer force of the hit rattled the entire ship. Whitmore didn't wait. "All ships, open fire," she ordered. The void lit up with human firepower. Railguns roared, their slugs traveling at hypervelocity, punching into the hive ship's outer armor. Plasma cannons burned glowing scars across its surface, while missile barrages exploded against its shield of living drones. The smaller drones died by the hundreds, but more swarmed out of the hive ship's launch bays, moving to intercept the fighters. Lieutenant Jason Ward led his Black Talon squadron into the chaos. The enemy fighters didn't fly like machines. They twisted and darted like predators, their movements unpredictable. Ward's targeting computer struggled to lock on, so he switched to manual, firing short, precise bursts. One enemy tore apart under his guns, its fragments spinning into the black. "Stay sharp, they're coming in close," he called to his pilots. The TCS Vanguard took another direct hit. This time, part of its outer hull split, venting atmosphere into space. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut, sealing the breach. Even damaged, the Vanguard kept firing, its massive railgun pounding at the hive ship's core. It was the kind of stubborn defiance only humans seemed capable of, refusing to retreat even when bleeding. Ethan Cole worked furiously at his console, scanning for weaknesses in the hive ship's defenses. Between the weapon's fire and the swarm of drones, it was hard to get a clear reading. Then he saw 3 large vents near the aft section, glowing faintly. "They're overheating their reactor cores," Ethan said. "If we can hit those vents, it might overload the whole system." Whitmore didn't hesitate. She relayed targeting coordinates to every capital ship in range. "Synchronize." "On my mark," she commanded. The Iron Resolve, Vanguard, Dominion, and Starbreaker all shifted their guns toward the weak point. The hive ship seemed to sense the danger. It sent every remaining drone to shield the vents. Jason Ward's fighters dove in, blasting a path through the swarm. His voice was steady, even as his cockpit shook from near misses. "Clear those vents. Make it count." One by one, enemy fighters fell under the Terran guns. The swarm thinned just enough for the capital ships to get a clean shot. "Fire!" Whitmore's voice cut through the coms. The synchronized volley from 4 dreadnought railguns slammed into the hive ship's aft section. Armor shattered, organic plating ripped apart, and a shockwave of energy burst from within. For a second, the ship seemed to freeze in space, as if it were holding its breath. Then the explosion came. It wasn't a single blast, it was a chain reaction. The energy cores inside the hive ship went critical, sending waves of light and fire across its hull. Massive sections broke away, spinning out into the void while the core imploded. The shockwaves slammed into the human fleet, shaking every ship, but their shields held. When the light faded, the hive ship was gone. Only drifting debris remained, glowing faintly against the darkness. The swarm of drones that had survived scattered in all directions, fleeing into the cold. A cheer went up across the human and Xyler fleets against all odds. They had destroyed one of the swarm's greatest weapons, on the Bridge of the Iron. "Resolve," Ethan let out a long breath. "Target destroyed," he said, his voice somewhere between exhaustion and relief. Whitmore simply nodded. "This is one battle," she reminded them. "They'll be back. And next time they'll come harder." But even as she spoke, she knew they had done more than just win a fight. They had shown the galaxy that the Draxon swarm could bleed. And once the galaxy saw that, everything would change. The battle was over, but the silence that followed felt heavier than the noise of the fight. The space around Relkar was littered with debris, glowing fragments of the hive ship drifting slowly away into the black. The Draxon swarm had fled, their remaining ships scattered and broken. For the first time in months, there was no enemy fire in the skies above Xyler space. On the Bridge of the Iron Resolve, Admiral Laura Whitmore stood with her arms behind her back, looking at the tactical display. Green icons for friendly ships still glowed on the map. Some were damaged, but none had been lost. It was a victory clean, decisive, and rare in this kind of war. Ethan Cole sat at his console, his fingers still moving across the controls, even though the danger had passed. He was running checks, confirming that there were no more incoming threats. His shoulders ached from hours of tension, but he didn't complain. This was the kind of mission every communications officer dreamed of, one where you brought hope instead of bad news. Across the fleet, crews were already at work sealing hull breaches, repairing scorched armor, and tending to the wounded on the TCS Vanguard. Medics rushed injured crew members to the infirmary. Even battered, the ship still floated in formation, her crew refusing to let damage slow them down. Messages of thanks began pouring in from Xyler commanders and civilian leaders. One message from Chancellor Varys was broadcast to the entire fleet. Her voice was steady, but it carried emotion as she spoke. "To the Terran fleet, you came when no one else would. You stood between us and extinction. The Xyler will not forget this." Down on Relkar's surface, people filled the streets for the first time in weeks. They looked up at the sky, where the silhouettes of Terran warships moved like guardians. Children pointed at the ships, asking their parents who the humans were, and for once, the answers did not carry fear, they carried respect. In the fleet's mess halls, there was no loud celebration. Instead, there was a quiet sense of pride. Pilots leaned back in their chairs, swapping stories of the fight. Engineers spoke about how close they had come to losing power on certain systems, but had managed to keep them running. Everyone knew that the war wasn't over, but for now, they had done something worth remembering. Admiral Whitmore kept her focus on the larger picture. She knew the Draxon swarm would regroup. The destruction of the hive ship would anger them, and their retaliation could be swift and brutal. But she also knew that this battle had changed more than just the situation in Xyler space. It had changed the way the galaxy looked at the humans. In the far reaches of known space, other civilizations were already reassessing their strategies. The Ovari Republic, which had once dismissed human fleets as reckless, now sent envoys requesting talks. The Vector Union began quietly shifting its defenses, worried that if the humans could destroy a hive ship, they could also challenge their fleets if needed. Even neutral systems, long determined to stay out of conflicts, started considering alliances with the Terran Confederation. For the Xyler, this wasn't just about military victory, it was about survival. They had been on the edge of collapse, losing territory, fleets, and hope. Now, with the humans beside them, the future didn't look certain, but it no longer looked hopeless. On the bridge, Ethan watched as Xyler ships formed up alongside the Terran fleet. Their movements were clumsy compared to the humans' tight formations. But the sight was powerful. Two very different peoples moving together toward the same goal. It wasn't just symbolic. It was the start of something bigger. Later, when the fleet held its debrief, Whitmore addressed every ship through the network. Her voice was calm, but there was steel in it. This was one battle, she told them. One victory. The swarm will come again, but now they know this. When the Deathworlders arrive, they don't leave until the fight is finished. Her words were replayed across the fleet and even on Xyler civilian channels. They became something more than just orders. They became a warning to their enemies and a promise to their allies. In the weeks that followed, the victory at Relkar began to take on the weight of legend. Some called it the Day of the Iron Resolve after the flagship. Others simply called it the turning point. Whatever the name, it was remembered as the moment the galaxy saw that the Draxan swarm could be stopped, and that the ones who could stop them were the Deathworlders. Ethan Cole, though just a communications officer, felt the change in the way people looked at him and his crew. When he walked through Xyler corridors, soldiers nodded in respect. Civilians offered quiet thanks. He wasn't a hero in the same way the fighter pilots were, but he knew he had been part of something that would be remembered. From her private quarters, Whitmore looked over the after-action reports one last time. Her mind was already turning toward the next move, because she knew the swarm's response would come, and it would be massive, but she also knew they would be ready. The humans had made their stand, and now the galaxy understood Deathworlders didn't just fight battles, they changed wars. The weeks after the battle were a blur of movement, repairs, and new plans. The wreckage from the hive ship still drifted in the outer edges of Xyler space, a silent reminder of what had happened. Salvage teams moved through the debris fields, collecting anything useful: chunks of enemy armor for study, intact drones for dissection, and fragments of weapons that had once been feared across the galaxy. For the Xyler, these wrecks were trophies, proof that the swarm could be defeated. For the humans, they were research material, each piece another clue to help them fight better in the battles to come. The Terran fleet didn't leave right away. Instead, they stayed in orbit, their massive warships casting long shadows over the Xyler worlds. It wasn't an occupation, it was a promise. As long as the Deathworlders were here, the Draxan swarm wouldn't dare attack again. In the Xyler capital, Chancellor Varys called for a meeting between her government and the Terran Confederation. The war room had been cleared and remade into a grand chamber, banners of both peoples hanging side by side. When Admiral Larva Whitmore arrived, she came with a small group of officers, including Ethan Cole. The meeting was tense at first. Alliances in the galaxy were often temporary, made for convenience rather than trust, but this was different. The Xyler knew that the humans hadn't come for payment or territory. They had come because the swarm was a threat, and threats were meant to be destroyed. Negotiations lasted for hours. Both sides discussed patrol routes, shared technology, and mutual defense terms. The Xyler offered shield upgrades based on their advanced energy field research. In return, the Terrans shared their armor composites and deep space targeting systems. When the final agreement was signed, it was more than a contract. It was the start of the Terran-Xyler Defense Pact. The pact wasn't just words on paper. Joint fleets began forming within days. Xyler captains were trained aboard Terran ships, Learning how to coordinate and battle with human crews, Terran engineers traveled to Xyler shipyards, overseeing the refit of older Xyler vessels with heavier armor and stronger weapons. It wasn't always smooth. The two cultures worked differently, and misunderstandings happened, but the shared goal kept them moving forward. On the Iron Resolve, Ethan Cole found himself busier than ever. His comm station now handled not only Terran fleet transmissions, but also constant coordination with Xyler Command. Some days, it felt like half the galaxy was calling him, asking for updates, sending intelligence reports, or requesting supply escorts. He didn't complain. This was what victory looked like: messy, complicated, but alive for the people of the Xyler homeworld. The change was visible. New defense platforms began appearing in orbit, built with both Terran and Xyler technology. Joint patrols passed overhead, the sharp angles of Terran cruisers flying alongside the curved designs of Xyler frigates. Children learned the names of the human ships and their captains. In markets and plazas, it became common to see Terran uniforms walking beside Xyler robes. Not everyone in the galaxy was happy about this new alliance. In distant star systems, rival powers watched with suspicion. The Vector Union increased its own fleet production. The Ilvari Republic sent diplomats, hoping to keep the humans from forming too many alliances. And somewhere out in the dark, the Draxan swarm was rebuilding. Their hive minds would not forget the loss, and their hunger would not fade. But for now, the Xyler worlds had breathing room. They could rebuild their cities, repair their stations, and strengthen their defenses. And every time the people looked up and saw the Iron Resolve or the Vanguard in orbit, they remembered the day the Deathworlders came. One evening, Ethan stood on an observation deck of the Iron Resolve, looking out at the Xyler capital below. The planet's lights shone like a web of gold across the darkness. Admiral Whitmore joined him, her hands clasped behind her back. "You did good work here, Cole," she said quietly. He smiled faintly. "We all did." She didn't answer right away, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "They'll call for us again," she said finally, "and when they do, we'll be ready." That was the unspoken truth. This wasn't the end. The swarm was wounded, but not dead. The galaxy was still dangerous, and somewhere, another desperate signal would one day cross the stars, looking for someone to answer. When it came, the Deathworlders would move again, not for glory, not for conquest, but because in the cold darkness of space, there were too few who could stand against the monsters that lurked there. And the humans had already proven they were willing to be the shield and the sword. As the Iron Resolve slowly turned in orbit, its engines glowing faintly, Ethan thought about the message that had started all of this. A faint, broken call for help, nearly lost in the static. It had brought them here, changed the fate of a world, and perhaps the entire galaxy. He wondered how many other voices were still out there, waiting for someone to listen, and he knew when the time came, they would listen again. Because that was what it meant to be Deathworlders. When you answered a call for help, you didn't just show up, you changed everything.